Today on episode 141 of the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, we talk to behavioral economics expert Melina Palmer, and she's going to tell us how we can actually break down our organizational silos through behavioral economics. Say what? Yeah, you heard me right. We're going to build teams, increase profits, all through business economics. So, are you ready for this? All right, let's do it.
Welcome to this episode of Moving Forward Leadership. Stick around and learn how to achieve, excel, and become a leader that people willingly follow. Lead, don't boss. And now, here's the host of our show, Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy.
Welcome all to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and welcome to the Leadership Podcast revolving around the three domains of leadership. Leading yourself so that you can hit your peak performance, leading your team to build those teams to becoming high-performing teams, and leading your organization to increase your organizational output. Whatever that means, it's up to you and your organization to define that. But nonetheless, I and my world-class guests like Melina are here to help you achieve whatever your leadership goals may be. And it's so great to have you here, folks. Today, as I said in the intro, we have Melina Palmer, the founder and CEO of Brainy Business, where she provides behavioral economics consulting to businesses all sizes around the world. Not to mention, she's a podcaster as well. So it's a hoot. We have a great time. But seriously, there are so many connections made in this episode today. You got to check it out. We talk about what behavioral economics is, how you can use that to enhance your team, why it matters to individuals, businesses, and how you can get over your subconscious biases. There are so many great nuggets in there that it's funny because I wasn't even sure if I was going to have Melina in on the show when I got the pitch. I didn't know if she really and her business really fitted the motto and persona of moving forward leadership, i.e., improving, you're leading yourself, your team, and your organization. But the more we talk through this podcast episode, the more connections that her message has with my message. And it's actually incredible. So you're going to hear me talk about a lot of things that I talk about here at the show often, but in her terms, and how the way that she explains how things work on a subconscious level actually turns into practice in the leadership role. So you know what? It is time for me to stop talking and let you experience this for yourself. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. Melina, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. So awesome to have you here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So one of the first things I like to do with my guests is get them to give a little background about themselves, who they are, how they got to where they're at today, what's a little bit about your story. So why don't we start there before we get into the nuts and bolts and meat of the convo?
Yeah, so my background would be I got my undergrad in business administration with a focus in marketing. And there was, this one section of one class, just like part of a book that had this little bit about this buyer psychology and why people do things the way they do. And it was just the smallest thing. And I remember reading it and thinking, what? This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my whole life. And I was so excited about it. And I knew kind of in that moment, I had said, when I go back to school, I'm going to get a master's in this. Like, I don't want an MBA. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And I went into working in marketing and loving my jobs, and spent the better part of 10 years calling different universities from around the country and just saying, do you have this program, this, consumer buying psychology, what have you? And all the business schools said, nope, not a thing, doesn't exist. We don't have that. It's not available. And so I was just working and getting into innovation programs and things like that, leading marketing and branding for a $500 million financial institution. And when I was in this innovation program, they brought in some people from a group that's called the Center for Advanced Hindsight, which is out of Duke University. It's their behavioral economics wing led by Dan Ariely, who's prominent in the behavioral space. And so I found out what they were working on. They were talking about their studies, and I thought, this is the thing I've been looking for 10 years, and found out it was called behavioral economics, and got myself in a master's program and changed everything, and here we are. So I guess that's that. I can talk a little bit about what behavioral economics is, of course, happy to do that. But
you're taking the words right out of my mouth. Like people
Yeah.
talk, behavioral economics. I'm kind of having a little bit of flash to like, what's that show with the FBI agents? The behavioral analysis unit. So I don't think you're going down that route.
No. And I know
seriously,
for me, yeah.
What is behavioral economics? For the leaders out there who are listening to this show, a lot of them are obviously in the business realm, but they, like you, they may not have ever heard of this term in the first place. So let's dive in there, shall we? What is it? What does it compose of? All those things.
Yeah. And so for me as a marketer, and while I did fine in the math and econ classes that I took in my undergrad, it was never my jam per se. Economics wasn't something that I was super duper interested in, I guess. And so when I heard the terminology that was what it's called, I said, no, that can't be what we're looking at. But it is. I like to just say it's the psychology of why people buy. And it's if traditional economics and psychology had a baby, we would end up with behavioral economics. It is a field that is relatively new, though the science that it's based on is many decades old, but it is something that came around because traditional economic models are built on assumptions that we have logical people making rational choices in everything that they do. And that's not the world that we live in. So often those models don't accurately predict behavior. And for a long time, those questions of why weren't as important, but over time, you had psychologists and economists and neuroscientists really entering into one another's fields and working on partnering on projects of research together to try and see if there are these threads and concepts within the brain that we can use to more accurately predict behavior and to know what people will actually do instead of what they should do or what they would like to do, but what's actually going to happen. And that is what behavioral economics is built on, this understanding of the brain and using that to nudge behaviors and understand what people will do and to build out. I help businesses apply it in a way that you're able to communicate better, have within your teams, as well as in marketing communications, pricing strategy, all sorts of aspects are the way that I, help people in business to apply the field of behavioral economics into their company.
Super interesting. One part that you just said that really struck a note with me that I want to pull at because I did not expect it to pop up. And you said that you could help businesses, use this in communication with their teams. Now, here at Moving Forward Leadership, we focus on 3 domains of leadership: leading yourself, leading your teams, and leading your organization. Mm-hmm. I thought we were going to focus completely on leading organization, i.e. how we go ahead, get more customers, get more clients, all this stuff. But I'm really interested now in how do we use this in the team aspect? How do we go about using behavioral economics to communicate with our teams, motivate our teams, and all those things?
Yeah. So I have actually, in the COVID world, been having a lot more presentations and things that I am doing in that change management space and understanding the way that you're communicating to and within your teams. And so the first thing just to sort of that I like to explain before we get into a little bit of how the concepts work is to talk a little bit about how the brain works, because even though we all have brains, we don't really know what they're doing in general. So when we think about what our brains do, if I would say, hey, Scott, what does your brain do?
We don't want to answer that question.
Yeah. And so you think about it, and anything that you were able to have come to mind, and same for the listeners, anything that popped up is within your conscious cognitive processing space within your brain. Anything that you could think of is in that area. And there's all this other stuff that is in your subconscious processing that happens. And we know we have a subconscious, but don't really like to think about how much it's doing at any given time. And so the highest study that I've seen this put it at says that the subconscious brain is actually doing 99.999% of what our brains are doing all the time. Happening in our subconscious, which would mean you've got 0.001 of your conscious brain that is all the decisions you're making all the time, and the way that you are interacting with your world and your coworkers and whatever that happens to be. Very small percentage that's done by the conscious brain. And the lowest studies put it at 95%. So it is a very substantial amount that is happening in the subconscious. And one of the reasons for that is because we can't afford the energy that it would take to run our brains in a way that would allow us to have more happening in that conscious space. It's very slow, and it just takes a lot more effort. And so our subconscious brains are using rules of thumb to help make very fast decisions. And so you're able to look and say, I know how to do this. I have a rule for that. That's easy. I can do this. This is how this works. And it's just kind of normal, like I like to say it's like the gatekeeper or a receptionist. If you're trying to get a meeting with a busy executive, it is filtering out things that don't need to bother the conscious brain. And often the rules that it's applying are good, and they are helping us to survive in the way that we should. Good stuff. But there are a lot of decisions that it's making that aren't necessarily serving us super well. And so this is where some of our biases and things that we've developed over many, many generations of evolution and within our own lives have built up the way that we respond to people who are like us versus people who aren't, or the way that when somebody says a certain word, it might ruffle our feathers a little bit differently and things like that. And so there are things when we're looking at communicating with teams, very often you may end up with silos within an organization, right? Like we are the marketing team, they are sales, they are business development, they are finance, whatever it happens to be, and it's us versus them. And so when you're looking at people in your own team, you are able to think of them differently, and you are writing this story that excuses away maybe some bad behavior, things like that, or that you don't necessarily afford to people that are from these other groups. And so if you were to think about when you are driving down the street and someone cuts you off in traffic, and you have that moment that person is a jerk. They are the worst. Their personality is just everything about them is bad. They're a bad person. I hate them. Sort of what your brain will put onto them, right? But what do you think when you cut someone off in traffic? Are you a bad person?
No, they totally understand. I'm important. I have places to go. People see.
I'm running late for that meeting. I've got something going on. And it's just because I almost missed my exit. I was listening to this amazing podcast. I got a little bit distracted and that happened, but I'm a good person. And so you're telling yourself this story about all that intrinsic stuff. You know who you are, why you're a good person. You were taking your mother to the hospital beforehand, whatever it is. But when someone else cuts you off, they're terrible. It's the same if you think about going into a meeting. So someone who comes late to the meeting that's on your team and maybe is your, best coworker friend that they're having issues with their son has been sick, and so give them the benefit of the doubt. Whereas maybe someone on the other team, you think, ugh, they're lazy and disrespectful, and they don't care about us because they are on that team. They're different from us. And so that's just, one of many ways that our brains can bias us against people that are not on our team or just not like us in general.
That's super interesting, super neat. So what I'm hearing from you is essentially a way that we can break down those silos, right? So like you said, is that, you get the marketing team, you get the sales team, the salespeople like, oh, the marketers don't know what the heck they're talking about because this is the product. You got the marketers going, oh, the salespeople don't know the benefits and the advantages and all this, how to actually sell the product. The R&D folks are sitting in the back corner going, right.
Well, and let me tell you about both of you. You don't know what you're doing.
Both of you don't know what the heck you're doing whatsoever. Now, that's interesting. So looking at it from the other person's perspective, and maybe if the leaders out there, they're listening to this show, they could be even in charge, most likely they're in charge of multiple silos. Like I've been in those positions where I've been in charge of 3 silos, and they all fight against each other, right? Because one depends on the other, and the other one's like, for example, so by day, I'm a senior Canadian Army officer. Moving Forward Leadership is my side hustle. And I was in charge of a logistics squadron with 200 soldiers. And we had 3 troops. There were 3 silos. So one was a maintenance, and one was transport, and one was supply. And there's always battles between maintenance and transport. Why? Well, the maintainers complain that the transport guys break the trucks, and the transport guys complain all the time because the maintainers can't fix their equipment. Can't keep them on the road, don't fix them right, or don't know what they're doing. So there's always these tensions. But again, it's just looking at it and getting people to think of from the other side of that coin. And as a leader, I think the biggest takeaway here is working your message to imply that look from the other person's perspective here. Look at it and that helps build those teams and bond them together. So it's super interesting that. Here, I totally thought we were talking about numbers and figures and sales. Now we're talking about building teams and all this stuff. It's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the core concept at play there is when it's called fundamental attribution error. For anyone who wants to go and look that up, and I have an episode on it I could share with you if you wanted to give it to the listeners, but. That's, the way when you are able to write an intrinsic internal story for yourself, but you don't afford that same luxury to other people, that's where it's that fundamental attribution error. So one thing you can do to kind of overcome that is to remember that when people aren't giving you the benefit of the doubt, you're getting upset, that you can say, this is their fundamental attribution error. Don't necessarily point it out to them and say, this is why this is a problem, because that never goes over very well. But also, if you have that automatic sense when someone is late or they are haggard between meetings or whatever it is, that you are able to say, if you have that initial response of that they are bad, to try and think about how you would want someone to consider you. If this was me, what might the story be? What could have happened where I would justify this if this was myself? If you are someone who's notoriously late or not responding promptly to emails or whatever it is, know that other people are thinking these things about you as well. So that's something to keep in mind. And the last tactic that I really advise for people in this space is if you can expand your circle of empathy. So if you're able to say, we are all part of team company versus saying it's marketing versus sales, but to say we all work at this company and we're all trying to achieve the same goals, and to not have those same silos, it can help you to break that down and give everybody else that same benefit of the doubt that you would like them to be providing for you.
Yeah, it's definitely, getting everybody bought into the mission, the vision, where the organization is going, for sure. So we talked about, weird side tangent I didn't expect, the team building aspect, but I absolutely love it. So let's go back to the more of the marketing, I assume the core of business economics. So how do we apply that in our business today? How do we go about using these ideas and principles so that we can, land those sales, land those clients, get those contracts in? help our organization bring the revenues in, etc.
Yeah, there are a few concepts that I like to share that are most common when we're talking about sales conversation, marketing, messaging, proposals and pitches, that sort of thing. So the first one is something that's called framing. And this is that the way you say something matters so much more than whatever it is that you are actually communicating. And to give an example of this would be, assume you are going to the grocery store and you're going to pick up some ground beef, and you go and there is one stack that is labeled as 90% fat free, and the stack next to it is labeled as 10% fat. Which one sounds more appealing and would you like to buy?
Give me some fat, please.
No, come on.
No, I'm totally joking.
Yeah, so everybody says that 90% fat-free sounds way better, and you feel compelled that you want to buy that one. Your brain will see 10% fat and think, ugh, like, where's that going? I haven't been able to make it out to the gym in a while, and I don't want that. It's exactly the same thing, of course, but your brain hears it completely differently. And so the way that you present the message can make a big difference. This is, I've had clients that I've helped where, I made a suggestion of saying, go find, if you have a stat that's something like, 86% of our customers buy from us again, or, something like that, go find some numbers and then we can look at the way to message it. And this particular client came back and said, okay, I found the number and it's that 78% buy from us again. And she was, ready to go put it out on the website and everything, to which told her that is not how you should message that particular number, because 78% does not sound as good as 86 would. And so instead I told her to say that 4 out of 5 people buy from us again. So 4 out of 5 sounds considerably better than 78%. You can also change that message, to say that most people come back. The way that you communicate it can make a really big difference. And essentially that's your framing piece. So the advice there is to try to rewrite whatever the message is as many ways as you can, including what would be the worst thing, right? So that's to say, 22% don't come back. That's bad too. That's something you don't necessarily want to go out and say, but that's what that inverse means. And when you look at all these kind of different applications, you can find the one that really is the most compelling when you're putting messaging out.
That principle holds through in I would venture to say all communication, regardless if you're trying to sell, sell a product like the 10% fat beef, or if you're trying to sell an idea to your people, your audience, or whatever. It's exactly the same thing. Bring the best foot forward, put it in terms that makes it look the best, while still being truthful to your audience. Because I would assume, if they find out that you're not being truthful to them, guess what? You're going to be done, right? But as long as you're truthful, like you said, 4 out of 5, 78% return, that's 4 out of 5. A little bit of rounding, that's not a big deal. That's normal. So I think that's a great way. So you said that's one of a few. So what are the other ones? Let's dive in deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on something that when I started communicating getting into this change management space, which, like you said, is not something that everyone focuses on when they're talking about behavioral economics. But to me, whether you are exchanging money or not, you are still, if you're meeting someone, you're selling them an idea that you want them to buy in on, whether you're actually paying them a new incentive or whatever it happens to be, asking someone to buy from you, you still are needing their behavior to shift. And it is, if you understand these rules of the brain, it makes it much easier, whether, again, you're asking someone or telling them that their desk is moving across the office, or you are wanting someone to buy your brand of toothpaste. Essentially, it's all really the same piece there.
You had me flashbacks of Office Space, the movie.
I know. That's my favorite example. And not to keep going back to the change management piece, but in that case, anyone would say that Milton's concern should not be the stapler, right? It's ridiculous. He should care about his pay and where his desk is and that he's not getting checks and all of that. But that's not what mattered. And even though he's continually saying that he just wants his stapler, someone took his stapler, I want my stapler, nobody's listening because that shouldn't be what matters. But if you were to just listen, then he would be fine and would be happy, right? And so we do this in business all the time. And whether it is those communication pieces that you are putting out on your marketing messaging that you think someone should want to buy, whatever this is. A great example for framing is I had a client, a financial institution, and they were super excited that they had their brand new checking account, that they had been building out a rewards checking. And they were very excited that they were going to put on all their billboards the lead message that they wanted to go with. And thankfully, they asked for my advice before they actually printed anything, was for it to say 1.26% APY on up to $25,000 in balances. Like that was the billboard message
for a dude with an MBA. Like even that is just like,
I know, and your brain is like, whoa, that's a thing that I'm not stopping to go, interesting, right?
Sign me up.
Yeah. And so how I had them change the framing on that was to instead we put the question on their billboards and their materials that said, did your checking account pay you $315 last year? And you can very easily say, no, it did not, but I would like it if it would. And then the ads we did on social media were that your checking account bought you these gifts and whatever with the $300 that you were getting. So $315 is the calculation of that 1.26% times the 25,000. But our brains don't do that type of math. Our brains are very lazy and they don't like to do difficult things. And so that will impact the way that we make our decisions. So if something's a little bit too difficult or complicated, we will put that on the proverbial shelf of something to do later, and later often never comes. Instead, you find your way to social media, or you get somebody else that's going to provide the service that you're interested in. And so making it so things are easy and that our brains don't get overwhelmed is a really important tactic in the behavioral science space as well. And so when you think about how quickly our brains get overwhelmed, it's much quicker than what you would like to think. There was a great study that was done where they had two different groups of people and they were having to remember a number. Half of them were remembering a 2-digit number, half a 7-digit number that you had on a piece of paper. And then you go through a series of tasks. And when you get to the end, you have to tell what your number was to the person on the other side. And so we would all say, 5 extra digits, it's not that big of a deal. One of the tasks they had to do along the way was to pick their snack of how they were going to get paid at the end, what your snack was going to be. And those who were remembering the 2-digit number were much more likely to choose the healthy fruit salad option. And those remembering the 7-digit number were much more likely to choose chocolate cake as their snack. And this is because those extra 5 digits made it so your conscious brain was distracted and focusing. You're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That looks really good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as you go through the steps. And the people with the 2-digit number can just say, 12. All right, I'm going to go through my day. That's easy. I can remember 12 when you get to the other end, and you could make a better, healthier decision in that process. And when you think about how often you are burdening people with all these things that they're having to do and remember and think about and filling out forms and extra steps and clicks and go here and remember this URL, just so many things, it's really easy for them to feel overwhelmed, even if they can't consciously recognize what's happening, and delay and put things off. And every point where you're making it another click, another step, another thing is a point where someone can leave you and not come back. So really streamlining that process is something, if any of your experience journeys, is something that can really make it that you will convert more than you would otherwise.
You're a leader. You're busy. You're busy taking care of your people. You're busy taking care of your organization. And if you're a small business owner and you're at the top of the food chain, you're here listening to this podcast because you want to know how to lead your people better. So you don't have time for that nitty-gritty details that revolve around marketing. Believe me, I get it. I'm with you side by side. So that's why, you know what, I've tapped into using Penji. If you look around at all my social media, banners and logos, they're all developed by Penji. Jonathan Grzybowski, co-founder of Penji, has been a great supporter of the podcast, and I'm supporting him. So if you go to penji.co, penji.co, and use the coupon code MFL15, you're going to get 15% off your monthly subscription. And that isn't just 1 month. No, that is for life. As long as you're paying into them, you're going to get that 15% off, which is huge. Check it out and see if Penji is right for you. Because you know what? I know they're right for me. Again, that is Penji, penji.co, and use the coupon code MFL15. And now, time to get back to the show. I see so many linkages with that theory to so many practicalities. Like, in my brain's going haywire right now. I'm like, oh, I see that there. I see that there. So I coach on people in goals and goal setting. I have a course called Power Goals. Mm-hmm. And a part of that is, it's about that, saying that if you leave things to the end, you're going to be so exhausted by the end of the day, you're going to make the wrong decisions. So it's all about front loading. And that's why, because you go through this and you end up going, well, fruit salad or cake, I'm so tired, I just want the cake. It's easy. It feels good, right? And the same thing, decision fatigue. I have an episode about decision fatigue as leaders and how not to leave the big decisions for today at the end of the day if you can help it. Why? Because you're exhausted. I remember I would come home and my wife would get so annoyed with me, and because she'd be like, what do you want for dinner? I'm like, I don't know, because I've been spending my whole day making decisions. I don't care, like afford a pizza, whatever. But again, it goes back to that theory, right? The application of the theory is that if the person is going through so many steps, by the end, they're going to pick the worst choice of the two. And it just like, bing, lights were going off in my head that whole time.
Yeah. Well, that's so the subconscious is driven primarily by rewards. It wants to get dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. I mean, that's what it's looking for. And it has reliable paths to help it get the things that it knows is going to pay off in the way that it wants. And so if you are having your conscious brain overloaded and bogged down, and then the subconscious is able to make more of those sort of bad decisions. But you can also, there are things, lots and lots of great books about habits and habit formation. And essentially, say if you can't help yourself but stopping at Starbucks, or I guess Tim Hortons.
Timmy's. Well played.
I'm in Starbucks country here in Seattle area, so
I will admit I went to Starbucks today, but I did go to Tim Hortons as well. So nice. Even out.
So if when you were driving, to work every day, you always feel like when you're on your way, you just feel like you have to stop and get your Starbucks. And I'm a chai tea latte person, and there is a lot of sugar in that sucker. So I know that it's not good for me. But when I'm there, I just, it's part of the routine. I always go. And we feel like we need to change the process when, that you just need to have willpower in the moment to not stop. And that almost never works because your subconscious really wants it. And it is pulling in information that's helping you to say, we really want this, you want this, you want this, you want this. And it's drawing that conscious attention to where all it can focus on is getting that reward that it knows is just through the drive-through conveniently right over there. If you instead change the way you drive into work, and you don't drive by the Starbucks, or that it's not easy to turn in, but you're on the other side to where you'd have to do a big left turn across traffic or something, it would be hard to get over there. That craving essentially just goes away when your subconscious doesn't see it. It very quickly will forget about whatever that thing is and will look for something else that can pay off in a habit. And we can have social interaction. Often has been found that that's what our brain's really looking for when we stop to get a cookie at 2:00 every day. But we also go and talk to our coworker. It's some work that Charles Duhigg talks about of he realized that his cookie habit was actually that he wanted to be able to talk to his colleagues. And so by omitting the cookie from the process, he was able to just go take 10 minutes to have that social interaction, and he was just as satisfied as if he would have eaten the cookie.
So cool. Yeah, in the Power Goals program, we refer to that as a barrier plan. You're putting something in between you and the action you don't want to do, i.e. getting the cookie, right? Like once you realize, oh, this isn't what I'm actually looking for, then you find a way to put a barrier in between you and the cookie and do what you actually are looking for. And conversely, I also talk about how you can remove barriers. So if you're trying to, like, oh, I should be doing this, like I should be going to the gym, how do you remove those, essentially useless, lame excuses that you use to not do it? So super cool, like loving this whole neuroscience aspect of all kinds of things that I talk about. And we do. So we've talked about, the message, we've talked about how we frame it and all these other things. What are some of the other ways that we can use business economics in the workplace there for the leaders that are listening?
Well, one really great thing that you can be doing is understanding priming, which is that everything that happens before the message is very impactful in, again, the way that it is received, and knowing that specific word choice or images that you use can very much influence the way that something is either chosen or not. So if you were to so there was a study, another one that was done, where they had somebody, they were going in to do this research. They happened to bump into somebody on their way into the building that was holding a lot of papers and a coffee. And then they dropped everything and said, oh, can you hold this for just a second? And had them hold the cup while they picked up their papers and then went their separate ways. And then that person, none the wiser, not knowing it had anything to do with the study they were about to participate in, then is reading about people like you used to do in school, where you read a paragraph and then talk about the person's personality. So half of the people, when they bumped into the person, were handed an iced drink, and the other half were handed a hot drink. And again, shouldn't have any bearing on what happened later, but the people who held the ice drink rated the person as being much more difficult, cold, and combative and whatnot than those who held the hot drink, who thought that the personality was warmer. Something that was totally unrelated, shouldn't have translated across. Also, if we're in rooms where we're told to be working with a team, when there's a backpack in sight, those teams are much more cooperative than when there's a briefcase that's in the room that, again, nobody said they saw. It wasn't there, but it influenced the way that we make our choices, because our eyes are scanning the world around us 2 to 3 times per second and taking in information and deciding what we need to move forward with. And so those primes, the images that you choose, the words that you say, I give the example of popcorn, where popcorn can be a wonderful smell when you go to the movies, and it makes you want to sit and get a soda and all the other things, and you really enjoy that experience. So that priming of scent is really powerful. If you've ever been in an office where someone burned a bag of popcorn, it's all anyone can talk about for the entire day, about how somebody burnt the popcorn and we can't focus on our meeting because this is all that's happening for us right now. And so often our communication can very easily be coming across as burnt popcorn. And I used to have a boss who I would get the first time this happened. So I got an email, it was about 10 a.m. that said, need to talk to you, be in my office at 2:00. Like, ugh, what's this? And so now my brain is overwhelmed and I'm thinking, what's happening? What did I do? I'm looking at every project I'm working on. What could I have done wrong? I'm ready to defend. And so I spend the next 4 hours getting, bracing for impact and being ready for a battle. And I get into her office and it was, just letting you know I'm going to be out tomorrow and I'm putting you as my out of office contact on my email. Okay. Right. So that's very much burnt popcorn. Where do you think I'm ready? If it actually was bad news, am I prepared to have a reasonable conversation in that moment? I know the reason she sent emails like that is because she's busy. She's got a lot going on. She was in another meeting, had to make a note, whatever it is. But communication is not about you and how easy it is for you to get a message across. If you don't have time to send the right message to somebody, don't put it in the email, it's about the way they're going to receive it makes a big impact in how well all of your conversations go down the line, and that you're not a burnt popcorn personality.
That is amazing. It's even more amazing because I have a side story to help amplify it from my trip to Starbucks today.
Oh, hey.
So I met with a good friend of mine who's a civilian, and he was telling me a funny story that recently happened to him. Was that he was in the middle of a meeting where they were talking, unfortunately, about looks like their company was going to have some layoffs. Mm-hmm. And during this meeting, bing, he gets a invite request from his boss's boss for 15 minutes. He's like, "We're talking about layoffs coming." I get 15 minutes with the boss's boss. He's like, "I'm done. I'm getting fired. Like, there's no way." So he works from home. He finishes this one meeting, goes downstairs, tells his wife, "I think I'm getting fired." Walks back upstairs 10 minutes later, gets on the conference call with his boss's boss. Like, "Yeah, so this is what we need you to work on, and we're thinking about giving you a promotion."
Right. Yeah.
Meanwhile, for that whole time, he was just sweating buckets, ready
Panicking.
to absolute panic. He's like, the rest of the meeting he didn't hear a thing.
Right. And so his brain is overwhelmed, and that's where the conscious, is so consumed with, what did I do? What's this? If they say this, I'm focusing on that. We then have confirmation bias. So he's looking for signals that are showing that he's going to get fired, or, whatever it is. It's very much how our brains are working against us, in many ways. But if you know what they're programmed to do, then it can help work with those systems instead of against them.
Absolutely. In the end, it made for a great story that I almost spit coffee out all over him today. And here I am now today talking about this on the podcast, but you're going to have to shoot him a text later and let him know I did this. So I hear a common theme popping up, and that is, biases, the role of the biases. You talked about it with the studies with the backpack and the briefcases and the hot and cold drinks and all this stuff. And they're basically subconscious biases that what we're hearing about. How can leaders overcome? Is it possible for leaders to overcome them, to be aware of them? What should they do? What do you think?
So the first most important step is knowing that they exist and having some sort of awareness. The thing to know is that we can't just decide that we want our conscious brain to do more, because, like I said, we can't survive as a species if our conscious brain is taking up more processing, because calories and all that good stuff. So we can only have this balance to where our subconscious is going to be always doing, 99% of what's going on at any given time. But you can choose what matters and what you want to focus on. Like you said, I do the same type of advice on narrowing down your goals. If you have 10 goals, or you have, 25 things on your to-do list today, it's just never going to work out. And even though it feels better to put 25 things on the list because you think we have optimism bias, we believe we're going to be able to do it, you just won't. It just doesn't work out. But if you only have one thing or two that are the absolute need to do's, then when you get 5 done, you feel amazing, like a superhero, because you had this low anchor set and you were able to, move beyond that. So in many ways, just understanding that they're there and knowing what you want to help your brain work toward and the behaviors that you do want to change, then you can start this process of a shift. And so starting new habits, new behaviors, changing the way that we are making these automatic responses work instead of against us, have them work for us, does take some cognitive conscious effort at first. So it feels like it's going to be insurmountable, but it's not. A great example would be when you learn to drive a car. When you learn to drive a car, it was slow and tedious and difficult. And you're looking, where are my hands? What are my feet doing? What's the mirror? How's this? It's very slow and difficult to do. The last time you drove your car, what probably wasn't like that. You didn't have to think about those things and you just go through your day. Well, it's because it became a rule in your subconscious. It knows how you drive the car. It knows where your hands go. It knows where your eyes go. Your brain is still doing all of that stuff, but it's part of the subconscious space. And so it doesn't have to take up your cognitive processing until maybe you're driving on a mountain overpass in the pouring rain between a semi truck and a guardrail. And then you can kind of feel everything slow down where your subconscious says, okay, we're done. Conscious, you really need to pay attention to this thing right now. And that is that transition point. So you can write new rules for your own brain and turn up some new habits if you choose what it is that you want to focus on. And one simple tip, if you want to be more innovative or creative in what it is that you're doing, even a simple shift of if you were to brush your teeth with the other hand, or if when you pour your coffee, if you typically put coffee first and then milk, if you were to swap and do milk first, that can actually set a kind of a chain reaction to where your brain is going to be more creative and innovative for the rest of the day because you made one simple change earlier on.
Okay, I'm a super fan of the milk before coffee because that's how I do it, but it's not to be creative or anything. It's just because I don't want to do more dishes.
But now you would have to go the other way. So for you, it's about changing it, or to say instead of drinking coffee, you're going to drink tea or have
Tea's my night thing.
But if you changed it to drink juice, then at night. Yeah, it's about making one small change. I like to say for the, with ladies, if we were to use your non-dominant hand to put on your makeup, it would be really hard to do at first. But it's training your brain to think a little bit differently if you don't rely on those rules that you've done all the time. Take a different route to work.
Continue to be the jokester and say I'm actually ambidextrous. So anyway, Melina, sorry. With all jokes aside, no, it's super awesome stuff. Super interesting. I love it. A lot of things have been reinforced to me. A lot of confirmation and things that I didn't even expect us to go down the route of when we think of behavioral economics, and it's super neat. I love it. Before we wrap up the show tonight, though, do got a couple last questions for you.
Sure.
And that is one question I ask all my guests here at the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. That is, according to you, Melina Palmer, what makes a great leader?
I would say thoughtfulness. And so both in the way that you approach your own problems and questions, as well as in the way that you interact with others. I end every episode of my podcast with the phrasing of be thoughtful, and it's for that same real purpose. Awesome. I know you got a lot of great things going on in the brain world, in the business world. So right now, it's all about you. How can people find you? How can they follow you? Feel free to give yourself a shameless plug. It's all about you now. Thank you. Well, the Brainy Business Podcast is available wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, and you can find it just as The Brainy Business or at thebrainybusiness.com. And you can also find me on all the socials as The Brainy Biz, B-I-Z, and love to connect on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever works for you. You can find me and would love to answer any questions or whatever you have.
And for the audience, as always, it's easy. Go to movingforwardleadership.com/141. All the links are in the show notes. Melina, again, it's super awesome to connect with you. Super awesome to have you on the show. Thanks for coming out. It's been a slice.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, that's all I got for you fine folks today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the interview. And most importantly, I hope you got something out of it. And if you did, remember R squared, S squared, right? Rate and review the show so that it gets a little bit noticed, a bit more. But most importantly, I can help more people, because that's what I'm here for. That's what my guests are here for, is to help more people become better leaders and not being bosses, right? So remember that. R squared, rate and review. S, share the show. Share this show with someone who you think can relate to the podcast as a whole and today's topic. And then finally, subscribe. Subscribe so that you never miss another episode. And you can do that via your podcast playing app of choice through movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. And as always, stop bossing and start leading. Take care now.